August 5th, 1943. The Barents Sea stretches before you in all directions. Nothing beauties, dark water, and the endless Arctic sky. A German reconnaissance flying boat hangs low on the horizon. Itis slow, itis ugly. Its fuselage looks nothing like a machine built for war. From the side, the crew called it the Flying Clog, a wooden shoe with wings. But on this August morning, as far as the Allies could see, this aircraft might as well have been a phantom. It had vanished into the cloud cover north of Norway, and somewhere below, a convoy of merchant ships, trawlers, and minesweepers was turning south in the freezing water, headed toward the Soviet Union, with supplies that Stalin's war effort desperately needed. The CAMC convoy didn't know they were being hunted, but they were. The Flying Clog had found them. This is the story of the Blohm Voss BV 138, an aircraft that nobody believed in, that almost didn't exist, and that became the Luftwaffe's most relentless hunter of Arctic convoys. And the strange truth is this: it should never have been built at all. Let's go back to the beginning. In the middle 1930s, the German aircraft manufacturer Blohm Voss received a vague request from the Luftwaffe. They needed a long-range maritime reconnaissance flying boat, something that could patrol the oceans for hours at a stretch, spot enemy ships, and report their positions back to German surface raiders and submarines. The brief was loose. The designers had room to experiment. Richard Vogt, the chief designer, sketched out an aircraft that looked like nothing else in the sky. The prototype first flew in 1937. It had 3 diesel engines mounted in a high wing. Below, a stubby fuselage with a blunt nose of the side profile that would earn it the nickname Flying Clog. 2 thin booms extended from the rear, holding a twin tail. To look at it, you would never guess it was a fighting machine. It looked like someone had glued together spare parts and hoped it would float. And there was a problem, a big one. The first prototype was a disaster. The fuselage generated too much drag. The hull wasn't strong enough to handle rough seas. When the aircraft tried to take off with a full load of fuel and equipment, the nose would dig into the water. The planing surface was all wrong. The twin tail booms vibrated so badly that pilots worried the whole thing would shake itself apart in flight. The cockpit was cramped. The crew had nowhere to move, nowhere to rest on a 16-hour patrol. The aircraft was directionally unstable. It couldn't climb. It was cold inside. It was slow in almost every way. The BV 138 seemed like an expensive failure. But Blohm and Voss didn't give up. They redesigned the entire aircraft. They kept only the basic wing structure and rebuilt everything else. A new, larger fuselage, stronger hull, more powerful. Always S A S S S S A S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S S. Engines. They stretched out the twin booms and repositioned the tail. The crew compartments were redesigned. They tested it. They flew it. And slowly, something strange happened. The Flying Clog started to work. By 1940, the Luftwaffe had ordered the first production models. By 1941, the BV 138 was entering regular service with the maritime reconnaissance squadrons. It was never fast. The three diesel engines meant it cruised at barely 150 miles per hour. But speed wasn't the point. Endurance was. The BV-138 Pei could stay in the air for 16 hours, fully loaded. It could fly more than 4,000 kilometers on a single tank, and with external fuel tanks and radar packs, rocket-assisted takeoff bottles mounted under the wings, that range could stretch even further. More important than the range was the vulnerability. The diesel engines were different from the gasoline engines mounted on other aircraft. When machine gun fire punched through the plans, fuel tanks, diesel didn't ignite the way gasoline did. A BV-138 could be riddled with bullets and still fly home. Crews respected that. They knew that when things got bad out over the ocean, a diesel engine might just keep turning. By 1942, the aircraft was operating all over Europe, in the North Atlantic, hunting for convoys bound for Britain, in the Black Sea, in the Mediterranean, in the Baltic. Booty was in the Arctic, where the Flying Clog found its true purpose. December 1941. The first convoys are running to the Soviet Union. British merchant ships, escorted by Royal Navy destroyers and corvettes, pushing north through waters that were barely charted, hunting for the Lend-Lease supplies that Stalin needed to keep fighting. The route was long. The weather was brutal. Budit was the only way to send ammunition, tanks, and aircraft to Moscow without traveling halfway around the world. The Germans knew about these convoys. They wanted to stop them. And they found in the BV-138 a tool that could do the job. A BV-138 would take off from an airfield in occupied Norway, climb painfully into the cold Arctic air, and fly north toward the pack ice, toward the edge of the known world. For 10, 12, sometimes 16 hours, the crew would scan the horizon. The pilot held the control column. The navigator hunched over his maps. The radio operator listened to the static. The gunners occupied the turrets, one in the nose, one mounted on top of the fuselage, watching for the British and American fighters that might rise to intercept them. Then they would see it. A smudge on the horizon, a mast, a plume of smoke, and they would. No, the convoy was there. The pilot wouldn't attack. The BV-138 wasn't designed for combat. It was designed to watch. The observer would radio back the position, the course, the speed, the composition of the escort, how many merchant ships, how many warships, which way they were headed. And that information, accurate, timely, delivered by an aircraft that had more range than anything the Allies had, was more valuable than bombs. Because the Luftwaffe wasn't alone in the Arctic, the German Navy was waiting. The heavy cruiser Lutzow was stationed in a Norwegian fjord, ready to sortie. U-boats were positioned in the shipping lanes. And when the BV-138 spotted a convoy, it would call them in, like a hawk pointing out prey to a pack of wolves. May 1943. Operation Wonderland. The Germans made a final, desperate attempt to shut down the Arctic supply route to the Soviet Union. 5 U-boats, 5 BV-138 reconnaissance aircraft, and the heavy cruiser Lutzow converged on the ice. The task plan was simple. The Flying Clogs would find the convoys. The U-boats would sink them. The cruiser would move in if it had targets worth the risk. But Operation Wunderland failed. The weather turned. The Lutzow was damaged by a mine. The U-boats sank some ships but lost the momentum. The convoys got through by the summer. The German offensive in the Arctic had stalled. August 1943. But the BV-138 didn't stop hunting. Novaya Zemlya was an island in the Arctic Circle, barely populated, barely charted. The Germans established a temporary airfield there, just a landing strip hacked out of the foam, permafrost, some log buildings for crew quarters, and fuel stored in drums. For nearly 3 weeks, 5 BV-138 aircraft operated out of Novaya Zemlya, flying from a base that was literally at the top of the world. They would launch in the morning, they would patrol for 16 hours. They would land at night under stars that never quite set because the Arctic sun barely dipped below the horizon. And they kept hunting, they kept watching, they kept reporting convoy positions back to German commands in Norway. No other Luftwaffe aircraft had the range to do what they were doing. No other aircraft could loiter in the sky for so long, in conditions so hostile, over an ocean so vast. The BV-138 was slow, but it was patient. It was ugly, but it was effective, and the Allies knew it. The British called the Flying Clog the eyes of the German Navy. They knew that when a convoy was spotted, death would follow. U-boats were deadly. A single German cruiser was terrifying, but worse than either was that slow, droning reconnaissance aircraft that reported your position, your course, your speed, the exact composition of your escort, everything the enemy needed to arrange your destruction. The Royal Navy tried to stop them. They flew their own fighters, Hurricanes launched from catapult ships, desperate expeditions that would climb into the Arctic sky and hunt for the BV-138. Sometimes they found them. When they did, the Flying Clog would dive toward the cloud cover, the engines groaning, the fuselage vibrating, gunners firing back. Rarely did the German aircraft fight. Fighting meant staying in the sky longer. Fighting meant burning fuel. Usually, the BV-138 would slip into the clouds and disappear. The British lost carriers to this war. They lost destroyers. They lost merchant ships by the British. Dozen. But they couldn't seem to stop the Flying Clogs from watching. One source of frustration for the Allies was that the BV-138 was simply too numerous and too elusive. By CEB 1943, the Luftwaffe had built more than 150 of them. They were everywhere the Germans needed reconnaissance: in the Atlantic, in the Black Sea, in the Mediterranean. Buty was in the Arctic, where they did the most damage. A U-boat captain would surface at night, check his signals, and learn that a convoy had been spotted. He would plot an intercept course. Or a German surface raider would receive orders to move. The cruiser would leave harbor. The captain would push the engines, trying to reach the dust. Reported position before the convoy slipped away. And more often than not, that timing was made possible by the BV-138. The Flying Clog had spotted them. The Flying Clog had called them in. By 1944, the Battle of the Arctic Convoys was nearly over. The Luftwaffe couldn't hold the initiative anymore. The Allies were too strong, had too many escorts, too many fighters, too many ships. But the BV-138 kept flying until the very end. These aircraft operated in the Arctic until the Germans evacuated their bases in Norway in 1945. The slow, ungainly, diesel-powered flying boat that almost never was built, the aircraft that should have failed on the drawing board, had become one of the most successful and feared reconnaissance platforms in the entire German air arm. Not because it was the fastest, not because it was the strongest, but because it was the most patient. It could see further than anything else. It could loiter longer. It could deliver information more reliably. And that information, delivered day after day, month after month, over an frozen ocean at the edge of the front world, cost the Allies dearly. By the end of the war, not a single intact BV-138 remained. They were either destroyed in combat, scuttled by their crews, or forgotten in some backwater airfield when Germany collapsed. Today, no example survives in any museum. No Flying Clog remains on Earth. We know them only from photographs, from the logbooks of pilots, from the testimony of men who flew them and fought against them. But the men who knew them, the Allies who faced them, the German crews who flew them, remembered. They remembered an aircraft that had no right to exist, that should have been a complete failure, that became instead one of the invisible engines of the Arctic War. The Flying Clog hunted convoys from one edge of the ocean to the other. It reported positions that sent submarines and surface raiders into the kill zone. It did less fighting and more watching than almost any other combat aircraft. But watching in the Arctic in 1943 and 1944 was often the most lethal weapon of all. Here's what I want to know. Do you think the Arctic convoys would have succeeded if the BV-138 hadn't been able to spot them? Or was the outcome already decided, and the Flying Clog was just another piece on a board that was already lost? Let me know in the comments. Hit like so YouTube knows to push this to more people. Because if you're interested in the obscure aircraft of the Second World War, the machines nobody talks about but everybody remembers, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Next time, we're covering the aircraft that hunted alongside the BV-138, a German long-range patrol bomber that made the survival of any Arctic convoy a desperate gamble. Subscribe so it lands in your feed. Thanks for watching.